welcome to the Sandbox, everybody. So it's good to see you. Nobody's fallen asleep. Anybody have dinner yet? Okay, some of you have. We haven't. We've been working hard and busy and lollygagging. Not lollygagging.
Lollygagging.
Working hard. Well, Father Avinu Malkeinu, Father our King, we come before you tonight as we study your word and look forward to what you have for us tonight. As we just kind of get a different mindset, a different alternative, I guess, of just a way of thinking and to understand how you created us, how you created this world, how you established things to work and be in our midst. So we're excited to look at it and go deeper and deeper every week as we look at Genesis 1, Lord. Give us wisdom and more insight, not only through what I bring to the table, but what everybody brings to the table, Lord, in our Bible study. So, Lord, we give you glory and praise tonight as we study your word. Bashem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. And let me do the blessing over our Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'ivrei Torah. Amen. Blessed are you, Lord God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us in your commandments and commands us concerning the study of the Torah, of the word of God. Amen. Amen. So tonight on part 3, we've talked about how to look at creation a little bit differently. We've talked about that to the ancients, the world around them and how they interpreted the world around them is different from how we would interpret the world. And our Western mindsets were very scientific, right? For instance, let me just bring this up real quick while we're doing it. And I think he uses this example in his book as well. Let me let in Yendri. And you know what? We got more people coming in early tonight, and I love it. You know why? Because our wonderful friend Lilia has been sending out. I made her the administrator on communications with WhatsApp, and she's faithful to send out a text and remind everybody. So I'm excited. We got more people tonight, so that's wonderful. So anyhow, for instance, let's talk about the sun real quick. To consider the sun being there and being in existence, what comes to our mind when we think about the creation of the sun? What comes to your mind when you think of the sun being out there?
A fiery ball.
A fiery ball of just a fiery ball? Do you go deeper in that? What's the sun made of? Gases. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Let me let me put everybody on mute here real quick here so I can so we don't have any feedback. Okay, what about some of you others? When you think about the sun, what do you guys think about? Okay. Somebody can say something. I'm gonna put everybody on mute, but if you want to talk, just go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. So when we think about sun, we think in a Western mindset of it's there, it's a gas, it's heat, it's that kind of thing. But we think about the scientific aspects of the sun. When we think of I don't know, when you look at certain things and we see a creative world around us, it exists simply because it's there. The material is there. The sun has material to it. So we know it exists because it has material to it, right? We know an ant exists because we can see the ant and it has existence. We know, but there's other ways to look at creation. And that's why I like this, is because it challenges us to look at ancient perspective views on what is existence. So my question tonight is going to be, our questions, we're going to post some questions tonight, but what does creation mean to you? So I want everybody to have an opportunity to speak in this. So you can't be quiet tonight and just pay attention. Okay, some of you might be able to, but what does it mean for something to be created? So I'll give Linda the first option. What gives you what is, like, I don't know,
well,
what is
for
creation?
Something to be created and for God to have to do it, it has to be something made from nothing.
Okay, so material, something that comes from nothing to a point of existence of being material. That's pretty good. What about some of you guys others? Anybody else have another? Now, Kathy actually bought the book, so she might be cheating a little bit, but that's okay. Go ahead, Kathy, unmute yourself.
Yeah, when I think of creation, I think of God's desire to share himself and
Ooh,
to
that's
create
good.
a space for others and purpose, and it's a relationship basically.
Okay, that's really good. That's really good. Both of those together. So substance, material, and then something that can be shared, something that can be experienced together, right? Something that's purposeful. That's really, really good. What does creation mean to anybody else? Hi, Alice. Welcome to the study tonight. I'm gonna go ahead and put you on mute too, okay? Just, and if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand or something, and then I'll call up on you. But I'm gonna put you on mute just so there's no feedback. Okay, all right. So that those two are really, really good. Anybody else want to bring into that what their idea of creation is? What they might be thinking, like when if something is created. So the question is here, what is existence? I guess is another word. Does something exist because it's been created and we can see it? Or is there another aspect of existence that we don't quite understand coming from our Western world? And I think that that's the key is where I'm trying to get us to go in this idea of existence, is to understand that there's things that exist that have a different way for us to look at, to understand, so that when we look at the world around us, we understand it a little bit different and hopefully get into the mindset of the ancient world. And that's the key. So when we read the Bible, it's important to get into what they were thinking when they were reading it and how did they decipher the world around them. So obviously, number one, like Linda said, and she's very scientific. So Linda thinks in scientific terms all the time. So when she thinks of the sun being created, she sees it. So therefore, there's substance to it and there's creation. Kathy brought in this idea that when something that is there has been created so that we can participate in it and share with it, and for something that God has created, something for us to share in it. So that's a great perspective. Did you have anything else?
I do, yeah. When it's created, it is whole and perfect, as opposed to, we were talking a little bit about evolution. Evolution, you need parts and mutations and additions of mutations, which never works, but that's what they believe in.
But it
And
starts from something already created, so to speak.
yeah, so those two things, something that is created is whole and perfect, as opposed to partial and then grows on its own.
No, it doesn't grow. You throw it in a bag, you shake it all up. If we get a bunch of watch components and throw it in a bag, let's just get like, the little springs, the little circles, a little glass, throw in a bag. Let's shake it. Let's shake it for a long time. I'll shake it for 24 hours. You shake it for 24 hours. You guys all shake it for 24 hours. And we'll see if a Rolex comes out of it. After a week. It'll never happen, right? It just won't happen, right? There's this concept of it. That'd be great. We just throw a bunch of parts in there and shake it up and a Rolex watch pops out. That'd be like, whoa, okay. But so I guess what I'm trying to get at is the idea behind material, something that has just material to it. And he uses an example in his book as well, which I think is really cool, a computer. A computer exists because we see a computer. But what part of that computer is existent? Is it just the case that makes it a computer? What if you had all the components to the computer and it was there, but no software in it? Does the computer exist? Or is it just there's part of the computer there, right? And then you add the software to it. And let's say you add all the software to it and you get all the hard case and you get all the software and everything in there and you're looking at it. Does it still exist if you never plug it in? So this idea of having a computer, I think that's a good argument in the sense that you can say, okay, when does existence start for this computer? Did it start when it had no substance to it and then it was created and then it exists, but does it exist and does it not exist until it's plugged in and working and it's functional? Okay, so that some people would argue, well, a computer doesn't really exist until you plug it in and somebody's using it. But even if you plug in a computer, it doesn't necessarily mean it exists unless somebody knows how to use it, right? So there's these ideas in the ancient world of materialism and just functionality. So think about the word functionality as we continue on in Genesis, as we consider the function, or it's not just a material thing. So for instance, we can see the sun, and the sun we know has substance to it, therefore it exists. But what's the function of the sun? And God sets it into motion. He says the sun shall what? Rule the day, right? Shall rule the light. And then the moon, substance to it, it shall what? Rule the evening. So it's got a function to it, it's got a role to it, right? So there's a role, a functional role to it. So I would say that there's different ways to look at existence because it has a functionality to it. The ancients would have done that. They would have not looked at something like a piece of wood and said, what makes up this piece of wood? They would look at it and say, there's a function behind it. There's something that there's more to it than just this substance, this material world. So that comes to this question. So I want us to think about this. And for instance, as we're going through it, number one, what is existence, right? What is existence? Now, here's another way. We use the word creation a lot. We create. In our society, we say create. So if I was to say I'm creating a book, does that book or that concept, or I'm creating a rock band. Let's say we're gonna create a rock band. We're gonna call it New Hope Rock. Okay, so we're calling it New Hope Rock, and we're creating a rock band. When does that band exist? Does the band exist when I thought about it? When I put it down on paper and pen? When I bring forth a drummer and a guitarist? Let's say I have all the people part of that rock band. Does that rock band still exist? And we've not created one song yet. We've not made one song, or we haven't sung one song yet. Now, we can argue at every one of those points that, no, the band exists, but when does it really become a band? When do you think it becomes a band? You're giving me that deep look. She's getting deep, and I don't know if you guys see it, but there's smoke coming up right now in her brain. So when does a rock band exist?
When they're actually making music.
Okay.
So they're fulfilling their purpose.
They're fulfilling a purpose. That's really good. But what about the creative process where I thought about the rock band? I even had New Hope Rock Band, right? Or something like that. Does it create then? There's these little aspects. So when you think about that, when God created the heaven and the earth, and he's bringing forth the creation of the heaven and earth, there's creative material that he's bringing forth, but is that material in itself existent? Because it's material. So I think these are really good questions, right? We don't want to get too heavily into philosophy and kind of mess everybody up. And we're not a bunch of, we're going to sit around and think about this stuff. But I want us to get this idea that something can exist beyond how we look at it, right? So a book, like I've always shared this, and I love this little thing, and I've shared this from the pulpit. Many of you have heard me say this a few times. Maybe you've never heard me say this. But I used to pose a question that says, what is the wealthiest place on earth? What do you guys think is the wealthiest place on earth? Any questions? Anybody want to answer that? What is the most wealthy place on earth? How about the diamond mines of South Africa? Yeah, Kathy, go ahead.
I had a totally different thought, and that would be home.
Home?
In the home.
Okay, that's excellent. Okay. What about anybody else? What's the wealthiest place? What's the richest place on earth? How about the coal mines of Western Pennsylvania? What about you name it, right? So I used to pose this question. And I would take people to the gravesite, and I'd say your local graveyard is probably the wealthiest place on the planet. If you could devise a machine that can get down into these graves and sap out all the dreams that those people had that they never fulfilled in their lifetime. Think about all the songs you can draw up. Think about all the inventions can come out. Think about all the dreams and everything that people aspired to be that they went to the grave and never accomplished one thing that they wanted to do, one hope or one desire they had to do. And you developed a machine that could draw all that stuff out. That would probably be the most wealthiest place on the planet. You'd become probably the most wealthiest person in the world. Okay, so I say that to say this is that there are things that exist inside of us that have never come to fruition and never come to material, but does that mean it didn't exist? I think that there's a lot of potential in every person to have these amazing things that they never see accomplished in their life. And so I think creation exists with all this. So existence is all that. And then what does it mean to say something exists? That's another question. What does it mean to say something exists? Because it's got material goods? Where I'm trying to get us again is to understand that I think that yes and no. Something exists because it's there, but it also exists because it's got functionality to it. It's got a purpose. It's got a purpose. And this is what the ancients would have understood. What does it mean for the world or the cosmos to exist? The fact that we can see it or there's a function to it. Believe it or not, when we look at the stars and the planets and we see the constellations, they all exist for one purpose. Not just to look at and see how beautiful they are, but they exist for what? What do you think they exist for? Remember, the Bible says that God placed them in the heavens so there'll be signs of times and seasons and dates. And he's not talking so much about the calendar. He's talking about to track the Moedim, the feast and the festivals. He's using that word moed. So it's this idea of these appointed feasts and festivals that God. So God, we look up and we see the constellations and we see Orion, and Orion's about around here. You can see Orion pretty good. That's about, you could, if you get out of the city, you can see more stars and stuff. But in Idaho, where I lived for many, many years, in Wyoming, where I was born and raised, it's like at nighttime when you look up in the sky and you see the Milky Way and you see all the stars and you see everything, you're just like blown out of the water. Here, you don't get to see that being in the city, but we know it's there. But they're designed to function so that we can participate in that functionality, right? And that's kind of where Kathy was headed with what she brought about too. So looking at these things here materially, we have a chair, I have a coffee cup. This coffee cup is beautiful. I love it. Look how fun it is. It's got a dome on top. It looks like a volcano is going to explode. Typically it does, and of coffee in my car.
Because of a bump.
I put it in my car and I put it on the dashboard on my car and I hit a bump and all the coffee just flies. If you ever get in my Jeep with me, you'll see that there's coffee stains all over the glass. And I clean it every once in a while. But anyhow, the coffee cup is here. It exists, it's here, but it plays a role. There's a function for why it's designed. I was looking for it earlier too. I'm walking around and go, A for Cos Cafe, A for Cos Cafe. Where's my coffee cup? Where's my coffee cup? So I'm looking around for my coffee cup. Why? Because it has a function. It carries with it coffee. It holds coffee, and then I can use it. So it exists whether I use it or not, but it's designed so I can use it. So when you think about creation being done in this way, everything that God created is so that we can take part, we can participate in the functionality and the role of what it was created for. That's how the ancients would have thought. That's how we should think. Okay, instead of just looking at the material goods and the scientific design behind it, we have to look at it, wow, this has actually been designed for me. This has been created for me. And that means that God had us in his mind the entire time. So we were actually in his thoughts, way before he said, let there be light. Way before he could say that, he had already designed this idea that he brought everything forward so that we can consume it, that we can be a part of it. So it's really cool. And like functionality, like for instance, when we talk about existence, he uses another example. He uses a restaurant as an example. And a restaurant, when does a restaurant exist? Does a restaurant exist when the person wrote the name out, wrote the menu, hired all the people, bought the building, brought in all the stuff? Does it exist then? Or does it exist when the government actually gives you the stamp of approval that you can open the doors? And then when you open the doors, does it exist if nobody's eating food? Right? So there's all these different levels of existence, but we would say, well, the conception of a restaurant exists if somebody can go in there and eat. So, so that's kind of cool. So just a different way of looking at it. Again, our culture tends to focus on material origins. And this might seem like a silly thought, but it really isn't. It's how we look at it. But we have to look at things functionally. How do things function in our society around us? How do we function? Why was a woman created? And why was a man created? And what's our role in this world, in this society? And then the Bible actually tells us that God was not pleased with man by using the term good or evil, right? You remember, we hear the word good and we think of it, something is good or bad or evil or wicked. But God's use of that term is it's not functional. So when he created man, he says there's no purpose for man. I created him, I put him here, he named all the animals, he's looking around, but he's got no purpose. So he says it is not good, it is not functional for man to be alone. Man cannot be function on his own. And in today's world, we make it look like the best thing in the world is to be single, right? Never marry, never have children, all these kinds of things. They really want you to feel that way about everything. But God's view is he is not functional. Therefore, he has to bring a purpose to his life. So therefore, what does he do? He creates woman, presents woman to man, and he says, now it is good. Now it is functional. So those are the ways you got to think about creation when we read the creation story. It's not about whether or not something is flat or is round, or you have the flat Earth Society and the round Earth Society and all the cosmos, and they're all this and all that, and all the planets are going to line up, and we're going to have the biggest earthquake and the biggest thing that's going to happen. No, there's a functionality behind everything that God created. So I think that's the idea there, the alternate way of looking at things. So to me, that's what creates a creative act. That's what constitutes a creative act. I love what Walton says in here. And again, we're utilizing this book. If any of you go out and get it, it's called The Lost World of Genesis 1. And it says Ancient Cosmology and the Origins Debate by John W. Walton. It's worth it. It's really, really deep thinking. Kathy's eating this up because she loves this. She's called to this kind. She just loves ancient cultures, getting into the mindset of the ancient peoples. I love this kind of stuff too. This is just drives me. But she also posed a question, and we're going to talk about it. But here's what he says here. And this is what he proposes, and this is what he argues. And so we're going to talk about that tonight as we go through the study. He says people in the ancient world believe that something existed not by virtue of its material properties, but by virtue of its having a function in an ordered system. Okay, so let me read that again. He argues that people in the ancient world believed that something existed not by virtue of its material properties, just because it's created. This doesn't exist just because it's a coffee cup, okay? But that by virtue of its having a function in an ordered system. And this ordered system is looking at it two ways, in human terms or in scientific terms. In the Western culture, we tend to look at things scientifically. Why? So we ask the question, why does this cup exist? Or how does this cup exist? And we look into all the material of what developed that cup and how it did what it did. We don't ask, why does this cup exist? Right? So in our Western culture, we don't ask why as much as we should. So an ordered system in the scriptures, when we read about creation, it's talking about a human in human terms, not so much in scientific terms. And this is why it's not good to try to prove science by using the Bible, or the Bible trying to prove science, or vice versa. You don't prove science through the Bible, you don't prove the Bible through science. You can get into some really sticky stuff there. And you've seen it. I mean, there's a lot of creationists out there that do a great job of really combining the science and all that kind of stuff behind the scriptures, but it's kind of like an overlay type of thing. It's not really the whole focus of why God created the heavens and the earth. He created the heavens and the earth to have a role and a function, so he can bring forth a family and place that family in the Garden of Eden and walk among us. And he gave us an ability to be a part of this world. And I love it. That's why when we read the first chapter of Genesis, everybody go to Genesis chapter 1 in your Bible. Genesis chapter 1. Let me pull it up as well. We see God use this word, and it is good, many times. Now, I'm repeating myself a lot from the last times that we've talked, but let's go to it anyhow, because I think, and I'm just going to read out of the New King James or the English Standard Version tonight. Okay. And then we get to the first part here where it says it was morning, it was day. You get to verse okay, we actually get to verse 3. And it says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. So again, here we have this word tov in Hebrew, which means good. But if you put it in this process that we're talking about, its functionality, it's got a purpose, it's got a role. Then when you read it, you can look at it and say, and the Spirit of God hovered, or verse 3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that the light was purposeful, functionable. It had a function to it. There's a purpose behind the light. Okay. And God separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, there was morning, the first day. So that's the first day. And you get to the second day. And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, which means the skies, the Shemaim. It's not so much heaven in the sense of where he's at, but there was this skies, this so-called second heaven, so to speak. And God expands heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. So up to this point, he doesn't say, and it was good, except for when he created light. Okay. Then you get to the third one. And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. So here's the first time where we actually see some kind of creative act outside of the light. We see something here where he separated the waters from each other. He made an expanse in between them, caused one heaven, right? One earth. Then he gets here and he says, now let's gather all this stuff together and let there be dry landing appear. So now we have the seas and the dry land, and the oceans and the dry land appearing. And in this process of doing it, that's when God says, okay, now there's a role here. There's a purpose here. There's a function. This is good. This is good. Like there's a function to this, that there's something here that's waters. There's something here that's dry land. It's functionable. And we know that in today's world, right? We know that we can't just walk out into the water and just go swimming and be among the fishies without something to give us a purpose behind it. And even walking around on this dry land, it's like we know we can't just walk through anything. We need something. But there's function taking place here, okay? And then it was good. And then we get down here to verse 11. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which there is seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was functionable. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. So again, God is sitting there saying, this is all functionable. This is all good stuff because it's got a purpose behind it. Do you guys catch in here this mindset? Hopefully you guys are kind of seeing this now as we're going through it. And then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons. Again, this is the Moedim. This is the feasts and holidays that he's talking about here, and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was functionable, right? And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. So every time we see that God creates something, he says it's good. We see that God had a purpose behind it, and now it's fulfilling its role, its purpose, right? So this is kind of how we have to look at it, and this is how the ancients would have looked at it. Then we continue on from there. That was the fourth day, right? And God said, let the waters swarm with swarming of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and everything living that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was functionable. That'd be a great translation, by the way. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. So again, he's creating things. They're coming forth. There's an existence there. But then because they're being purposeful, they're creating. They're creating of their own kind. And that's the way that we have to think about it. Verse 24, and God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Again, getting across the idea of purposeful, functional. Then God said, let us make man in our image. Oh, this is really cool. After our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So before we go on even farther than that, he's already designed, as he's bringing forth humankind, a role that we play, right? And that role is to rule over the created world that God created for us to rule over. So everything that God has created up to this point, he said, okay, it's functionable, it's purposeful, there's substance to this, there's meaning behind all this. And then he says, now let me bring forth man to rule over the things that I created. That's huge. That's a huge responsibility that God has given us. Powerful. When you think about it. It's like, wait, you chose us to do that? Wow, that means you have a great purpose in store for us. Okay, regardless of what, our dog thinks, but we're called to, rule over teddy bear. Teddy bear is not supposed to rule over us, right? Although I've seen some animals rule over their families.
That's not
Right.
good.
Especially cats. Cats. You cat lovers out there, I don't know how you do it, but your cats rule you. I just want to tell you that right now. Your cats control you. You do not control your cats. There might be some arguments about that. Okay, so let's move on here real quick. Okay, so we get to verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with its seed and its fruit, you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I've given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was extremely functionable. And our verses, our books say it was very good. Tov meod. I love that one. It's tov meod. Very, very good. And very functionable. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. So we get this culmination as we look at Genesis chapter 1 here, and we'll continue on with it. But as we look at this whole thing here, we see this creative process that God is bringing forth material goods, but it has a purpose behind it. And so we have this existence of something that comes forth, it's material, but it's just material until it has its role, and it plays a role. And so all the plants that grow, all the trees that grow, everything that plants seed, everything that, or fruit that has seed in it, everything that is green that is good for consumption, is good for the animals, is good for us. All the stuff he brings together, he puts the light, he separates the waters from the waters, he brings forth land so that we can live on it, separate, does all this stuff, livestock to come up, everything to come up. And he says, I'm creating something that has substance and it's useful. Then he brings us along and says, okay, here's why I created everything. It's for you guys. And I just think that is beautiful. I don't know about you guys, but I think that is really, really great, because he's given us such a responsibility in this creation. Okay, now in the process of that, let me bring up a couple of things that I think are really important to highlight on this, because I think our world sometimes gets it wrong. So we have a lot of people in our society today that say, if people weren't around, our world would exist better and function better, and our planet would heal if we were out of the way. Now, yeah, we haven't been good stewards of our planet. We could have been better, but I'm sorry, the planet would fall apart if it was like that. The predators would breed so much, animals would die, livestock would die because they're dependent on humans. The seas would be overrun with creatures to the point where it would just not be able to sustain itself. It would function for a long time without us, but eventually it'd fall apart, and vice versa. We cannot live without the things around us either, because we all partake in that together, type of thing. But we have a whole group of people around today that worship the creation and not worship the creator. And part of that is they don't understand the roles and the functionality that these have. Is that when people put a creation in place of human, or place of God, then it gets dangerous. And I think that that's what we face in our world today. We have a a mindset of what is it? Um, global warming and destruction out there, and that we are destroying the planet. So they're taxing us and charging us for something that you can't even fix, because I think a lot of it is a hoax. I actually don't believe in a lot of it. And I apologize if I offended anybody tonight, but I'm sorry. I think that our culture has swallowed the pill. We swallowed the hook, line, and sinker on this one. Now, that does not mean that we have been good stewards with what God has given us, because the Bible says also that the whole world is moaning for the sons of God to be revealed. So it's like we haven't done a great job of taking care of our planet. And part of that was that we're allowed to do. Now, here's what I mean by that. I was arguing with a global warmist one time. We were just having an argument, and she was giving me a hard time for eating meat and consuming meat. And so she was a vegetarian at the same time, giving me a hard time, saying that we have global warming and what's the other one? They don't call it climate change. They call it climate change now, which is kind of a cop out because climate always changes. I don't think even in Florida, when it's 82 degrees every single day, we have wind blowing today, and it was cloudy today, and it was actually really nice. Didn't feel like 82. I was going for a walk with Teddy Bear, and it was 82 out, but I was in the shade, and the wind was blowing. It was actually very, very nice. It wasn't very humid. But there's other times where it's 82 degrees out, and it feels like 105 out there, and you're sweating like a mad dog. So I think they cop out when they just call it climate change. But anyhow, I'm arguing with this person about it, and I asked her, I said, "Do you eat kosher?" And she goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "Do you eat kosher?" She goes, "I don't know what that means by far as eating kosher." I go, "Well, do you eat shellfish?" "Yeah." "What's your favorite shellfish?" "Oh, I love lobster." "Okay." "Do you eat shrimp?" "Yeah, shrimp." "Okay, how about crab?" "Oh, I love crab." I go, "Okay. How about oysters?" "Oh, I don't know about oysters, but and we just had this little conversation going back and forth. And she said, "Well, why do you ask about that?" Now, she was more of a pescatarian, not a vegetarian. I said that earlier, she was vegetarian. But yeah, we were arguing back and forth about climate change and global warming. And I said, if you really believed what you're shoveling, it's a kind way of saying, if you believe what you really are preaching, you would not eat an oyster. You would not eat crab. You would not eat lobsters. And she goes, "Why?" I go, "Because those are the natural filters that God designed to clean up the salt water." For instance, one oyster in its lifetime, and even the snail, but one oyster, what's the other one? Not oysters, but what's the other ones, the smaller ones? Uh,
So
not a, yeah, mussel, but oyster, I'll say oyster. There's the other one that's like an oyster. They filter up to 40,000 gallons of salt water in their lifetime. They've taken a whole group of oysters and they put it in a dirty fish tank. And I can't remember how many oysters they put in there, but within 24 hours or within 48 hours, that water was purified and clean. And it was this murky salt water. And I've seen, you can get on YouTube and look up these type of things, but there's been estimations anywhere from 10,000 to 40,000 gallons of salt water is filtered by one oyster. Now imagine an entire ocean that's been pulled out, and all those oysters have been pulled out of that ocean, and we eat them. The Japanese cultures, the Asian cultures, they eat everything. They eat the cucumbers, they eat everything that comes out of the ocean, right? All the stuff that is designed to filter the oceans and to keep it salty, clear, and clean, and to make the fish that we've been given the okay to eat with fins and scales to be healthy, to be strong, and to give us the nutrients that it has. Our planet has vultures, or the earth. The earth has vultures. We have eagles, we have bears, we have lions and tigers. Oh my, right? We have all that stuff. And the reason why we have all those is to be the scavengers to clean up all the dead around us, because they'll eat pretty much almost anything. Pigs will eat everything there is. I remember I was arguing with somebody one time before, and they said, "Well, I love pork." And I go, "Well, you're eating pretty much anything and everything, because pigs will eat everything and anything." Okay. But when you eat unkosherly, and I'm not trying to say anybody here you have to start eating kosher. But what I am trying to say is that they have a purpose, they have a function. So God created animals that we can consume. And so when he allowed us to eat animals, he said, only eat those who have a split hoof and chew the cud. And he said that for a purpose, for a reason, because within that, there's enough nutrients and all the stuff that we need to survive and to properly have that digestion system take place. The other stuff, he says, don't eat. And when you look at all the other stuff, they are scavengers. They clean up this planet for us. You look at all the stuff in the ocean. For instance, I've never had a pompano, but I've wanted to have a pompano, the fish, they're fun to catch. But a pompano is unkosher. I didn't realize that until recently, that they actually have no scales. A pompano has fins, but they have no scales. I didn't know that. However, a shrimp has fins and scales. So some of you might argue with me, but I think shrimp fall under the kosher idea there. Okay, some of you might like, oh, Rabbi, I'll have a good argument on it. It might be a different scale than a fish, but it's still a scale. It's just a rounder fish. And some of them have fins. Look at Kathy's like, are you kidding me? What are you talking about? She's okay, so I might be I'm not the only rabbi. I already know two other rabbis that agree with me on this. So we already declared shrimp kosher, so you guys can have shrimp.
Because
Okay.
it's two rabbis.
Two rabbis.
Agreed.
Yeah. People are watching this are gonna, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have a bunch of email on this one. But anyhow, I don't have a problem with shrimp because I think it's a brown fish. It just has fins and scales. Now there's some shrimp that don't have any fins. Now you don't eat those shrimp. They're bottom dwellers or do whatever. But anyhow, I'm saying all this because God already designed a function for them to keep this planet clean and healthy and whole. And when we when we do what God doesn't want us to do, it hurts the world around us. It just hurts the world around us. So we need to be better stewards. And I'll agree with most people on this. If they want to talk about being a better steward of the planet around us, yeah, we need to be better stewards. We need to till the ground. We need to do those things until the Messiah comes. But the reality is that most of us we don't give second thought to some of those things. And so all those environmentalists out there that complain about everything, when they're eating a lobster or they're eating a shellfish or they're eating an oyster, I don't think they understand that oyster is designed to clean up the salt water and keep it healthy and whole for the salt to go out there. So we could be better at it. So anyhow, I say all that to say that there's a functionality behind everything. You were going to say something just a second ago. Anybody want to say anything to what I'm saying so far as everything has a function or a role? Kathy asked a great question last week. And this is kind of off topic a little bit because it's more a theological argument. But I agree with Kathy on this. And I think that this Walton agrees on it too. He just quoted from a particular book, and this particular book happened to believe in evolutionary creation or creation evolutionary. And that they believe in evolution. Like there's, believe it or not, there's Christians out there and scholars and science and Christian scholars out there that believe that they've swallowed this idea of evolution, that it's been around for a long time, and they use creation in this process. But in doing it, you have to get rid of so many things. You got to get rid of so many details. And in one of the details that they take this approach is that Adam isn't really a person, that Adam was just an idea and an abstract idea of how God created man, but there really was no Adam. Okay. Well, in her master's degree, Kathy had to argue this, or she chose that to argue, to make an argument in a paper that she wrote. And her argument is based on the Toledot, which is excellent because theologically you can get away from the Toledot. Toledot in Hebrew, or Toldot, whichever way you want to say it, in Hebrew means generations. Okay. So from generation to generation, what God says, you will do this from generation to generation to generation. And you look at the Toledot, or the generations of Yeshua, that traces all the way back to Adam, to an actual living person. So go ahead, Kathy, why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because she had brought that up, and I told her I might have you speak on this tonight. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And listen, if you guys have questions, please feel free to ask anytime. Just raise your hand. But I believe in the literal 6 days of creation. Okay, I believe in that. So just to let you guys know before Kathy speaks, I believe that God created Adam and Eve, and he gave them a role and a function, and for us to have. And I think that the earth expresses that, and our generations express that. The flood expresses that. Everything expresses this actual creation, that this just wasn't a evolutionary thing that just kind of came about over millions, 4.6 billion years of just this creation or whatever. I'm sorry, it's just, I believe that God was very active and had a purpose behind everything he did. So go ahead, Kathy. So
Yeah, so Yeah, I agree with his premise on the functionality of creation. I would also argue linguistically that I think there is some evidence of some material creation that's going on in the language. But the thing that I really got excited about when I'm looking at this, and I think most of us realize that the literature didn't have chapters and verses until like the Middle Ages.
Right.
So you can look at the text, and if you have a Bible that has the Hebrew next to the English, it's really clear to see it. Now, not all translations will show it. The Masoretic text by the JPS will show it. I actually pulled out my Torah scroll to see if it was scribally, if the scribe actually included this structure that's in the language that I'm going to explain. And the LXX, the Septuagint, does not show it, but another author that I like to compare is Robert Alter, and his translation kind of parallels and works with this same concept of the functionality. So the way that he's approaching creation, because when you open the creation narrative and you're just reading the narrative, it actually flows from Genesis 1:1 to what we call chapter 2, verse 4.
Right.
And
Let me look at that real quick. So go
yes,
to two verse. If you look at Genesis 1:1, so you have to read it in Hebrew. Now, Kathy, can you read Hebrew?
yes, I can.
Okay,
It's
read verse
Bereshit
1. Yeah, go ahead. In verse 1 of Hebrew.
Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. Now, the point that I'm making about this and the whole generations, the Toledot, comes into play when you can see the text in the Hebrew and the way that the scribes continue to create spaces for breaking sections up, because there were no verses and chapters. So when you get to chapter 2 starts with the heavens and the earth were finished. And then in verse 4, it says, this is the story, or the Toledot, of the heavens and earth when they were created. Then there's a scribal space where there's nothing written. And then the rest of verse 4 occurs. Beyom asod Adonai Eloheinu eretz ve'shamayim. What's very interesting about that is that it says, when the Lord God made earth and heaven. Now, there's two things going on there. There's two verbs, and our author will talk about this when you get to chapter 3. He's talking about the two verbs that are being used in the creation narrative, bara, which means to create, and it's only a creation process in which God can do. It's not used in any other context. But the other verb
Right.
that comes in here in verse 4 is asa, which means to make. And so it's more akin to what a potter would do. But what's interesting about the way that this is bookended, and in Hebrew, if you study the structures of the text, you can see where they were breaking up the information. So when we look at Genesis 1:1, and it says that in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, and then you go to chapter 2, and it finishes where there's this big scribal blank space. It says that God made earth and heaven. So it reverses those two nouns, heavens and earth and heaven, creating a bookends, what they call inclusio, bookends. And this is a structure you only see in Hebrew text. So it tells us that the creation narrative, in my opinion, and this is a case that I would make, the creation narrative begins in 1:1 and it ends with 2:4, which is describing the story or the generations. Is the first generations of God's working. For example, you have generations in your family. Your son begat your grandson and so on and so forth. And we see that throughout the biblical narrative. And what's interesting about this Toledot, this generation that begins our Bible, the creation generation, the word is spelled differently. Toledot always ends with a vav between the, it's a dalet, vav, and a tav. Well, that vav, after this creation narrative ends, we see the fall of mankind. The vav never comes back. And this is really exciting. Vav represents mankind because
Right.
the vav represents the number 6, and man, as we just read, was created on day 6. So the letter vav always represents in Jewish thought mankind. So the vav is in the end of the generations of the heavens and the earth, the end of the creation narrative, which we just finished reading. And the vav disappears from generations. If you want to read the generations of Adam, the table of the nations, Noah's generations, Abraham's generations, whenever they use the word Toledot, there is no vav in that word at the end of the word. It shows up, and this will blow your mind because it blew my mind. I get so excited when I just think about it. It shows up, you know, you want to know where it shows up? It shows up when Ruth and Boaz come together. A Jew and a Gentile come together, and now Toledot reinserts the Vav. Mankind gets reinserted into the generations of mankind. When a Jew and a Gentile come together, just like we see on the olive tree, we see that the generations are restored. We had the fall at the end of the creation narrative. The Vav gets taken out. Man is like, you know, separated from God in relational issues. But it gets reinserted when Boaz and Ruth come together in Ruth 4, verse 18. And that is so amazing to me. And
Yeah,
the
no,
only
that's
other thing that I would add,
no, that's excellent. I'm loving it. I'm going to add to what you're saying here, but it's really great. So keep going.
So the last point that I wanted to make is I'm looking at the actual structure of the Hebrew. And again, it's not in the Torah scroll per se, but it's in the Masoretic text. Sometimes they make letters larger and smaller to add a certain emphasis. Well, in this verse of chapter 2, verse 4, which gets separated into 2 sections and shows us that the creation narrative goes from Genesis 1:1 to 2:4, that verse 4 gets separated out, and it includes the word Behibaram, which means in the creating of them. And it's speaking of the generations of the heavens and the earth, creating the heavens and the earth. So this term here has a small hey, letter hey. And the letter hey in Jewish thinking represents breath. Because when you say the letter hey, you kind of have to breathe. And so if I were going to argue the material versus the functional process of creation, this hay is by the breath of God he created. This is basically what they're saying when they made that letter hay extra small. Now I've read from Torah scrolls that actually show that, but the hay, which represents breath, and Elohim having created them, the heavens and the earth, and the generations of the heavens and the earth, which includes each day that we just read, he did it by the breath of his mouth, by a word from his mouth. So I would say, from my perspective, that I think when we lift the curtain on creation and we come into this scene when God began to create the heavens and the earth, we're seeing a functional creation. It's the materials already there. And he's organizing as you've described, as our author's describing. But I do think, and I would argue based on that word, Behibaram, and by the fact that God is speaking let there, that phrase let there, and then also the concept of God kneeling down in the dirt and forming mankind and breathing there. That's that hey, that breath again. So I would say that it's functional, but there are components that we get sneak peeks into God's creative power in those moments when he's breathing creation into, speaking it, or saying let there be. So that's my argument there. But I just got really excited about the structure as a whole and where the creation narrative begins and actually ends, which is not what our Bibles reflect. And then the idea of the generations and the missing Bob. I thought those are the things that popped out at me as I was going through the first 3 chapters of his book.
Amen. That was excellent. Very, very excellent, Kathy. Excellent. Great job. Now for those of you who know, the word still is pronounced the same whether it has the vav in it or not, because there's a dot above the if you know Hebrew, there's a dot,
Right.
and that's called the holem. So you have the holem, which is above the vav, which makes it an O. So that's where you get toladot. But I love this idea that, and this is great, the vav was removed out of there and didn't come back until Ruth. Now, what's really great about that, and I'm going to just take your word for it because I've never actually looked at that to try to look into that. But what's really cool about this, when you're talking about that, what I was picking up from that was a whole new creative process of God saying, getting back to the beginning of what he meant when he created mankind, was that through Ruth, he's reforming or recreating this idea of this one new man of Jew and non-Jew coming together as this one new man, and therefore Toldot, the Vav comes back in because there's another creation of mankind here. I think that was really
You know
cool.
what they call
And
that?
then,
You know what they call that when they take the vav out and they just do the cholem? It's called defective writing.
defective, yeah.
And there was something defectively missing in man's relationship with God after the fall. After verse 4 of chapter 2, we start to go into the fall of mankind, and that's where it disappears, and then it goes to defective writing.
Yeah, amen. So what Kathy brings out, guys, is some really great stuff, because the Hebrew, okay, remember when because this is rabbinical thought, but it goes way beyond rabbinical thought. This is God thought. This is one complete thought. So the entire Genesis narrative that she was saying, like she said, starts with Genesis 1 and it ends with Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. Like she called them bookends. And if you guys have been, I don't know if I think some of you may have taken my class that I did years ago, but I did it when I first went to Beth Yeshua. I actually taught it on Wednesday night. But I wrote a class on the Jewish idioms of the New Testament. And I talk about these bookends. And oftentimes in the Hebrew, you will see these thoughts in Hebrew, and it's called Hebrew poetry. And it becomes this one thought. And our verses and our chapters kind of take away those thoughts, right? They take away this idea and this thought that God has, because we're dependent on verses and chapters to kind of give us some kind of context. But if you read the Bible, sometimes I would encourage you to just keep reading until you're done with a particular thought in the Bible. So if you were to read the Genesis narrative, or they would have read the Genesis narrative back in the ancient days, if Moses would have said, okay, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz, he would have finished up that entire phrase up to Genesis 2, verse 4, to get the kids, so that when the parents would have taught the kids the generation narrative, they would have done these bookends. These bookends are really important because they're throughout all the scriptures in Hebrew. And it's great that Kathy understands and knows and can read Hebrew, because you'll see these bookends only in Hebrew. In English, sometimes you won't see it. However, some Bibles separate it like that. And that's what I like about some translations. They'll actually keep the thought, the Hebraic thought throughout. I have this Bible, and I had to look it up into this one. And this one is like an ancient one that I've had for years. This is called, and a lot of people have this, and you can get it online. It's called the Interlinear Bible, Hebrew and Greek English. And so when you open it up, and it's also got the Strong's chords number, but let me try to put it like this and see if you guys can even see it. See this thing? It's just massive, right? It's really, really big like this. And it's got Hebrew and Greek in it, and it's a verbatim translation. However, in this literal translation, they're not literal in it either, which that's why I read to you guys a couple of weeks ago out of James Tabor's translation, because here it starts off in the beginning in the translation, but it doesn't say that. In the original Hebrew, it's saying at the beginning of God's creation. That's really the literal aspect behind of what it's saying in the Hebrew. But I looked at it here, and when you go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, in this translation, okay, they do put the small hay in here. So the small hay is in here. So that's what's really cool about it. And so you get to verse 4. See this right here, Linda? You get right here and you get to this word. Well, it's really hard to see, but
It's pretty small.
it's very small, but there's a small hay right there. See that tiny, tiny little hay. Okay.
Do
So
they
they put that,
separate verse 4 out? Do
they
they make
don't
a
separate.
space?
They didn't make a space, but they put in the small h. So at least they did that, but they didn't do the thought process. So this is why it's important for us to get to this idea and this understanding of what the ancients would have been, how they would have read the Bible, how they would have understood the Bible. What did it mean to see creation? Because the more we can get into their life, their mindset, the more we can take on this. By reading the Bible, we can actually understand what God's really trying to say to us instead of us trying to insert. And I think that builds it for when we read the New Testament. We read off how the rabbi or how the disciples ministered and preached the gospel. If we look at it from a modern perspective and we try to understand it from our processes today and the way we think scientifically and the way we think in our Western mindset, we can miss out on a whole lot of truths of what God is trying to get across to us simply because we're looking at it from a different perspective. But if we can get into God's mind and get into God's mindset and think about how the ancients would have read the Bible, it would have been easy for us. It gets easier for us to read the New Testament and understand what God is really trying to say. Okay. Am I catching everybody there? Everybody able to hang on with that? I mean, I know that we gave you guys a lot of thought tonight, but this is really cool. So the way we conclude tonight, because I really want you guys to really, I don't want to give too much more because there's so much more we can go into. And as we continue on with the weeks, we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I promise you, you won't fall asleep every week. I promise you guys that because it's deep and heavy. I'm not pointing anybody out here. Okay. I'm not pointing anybody out. But I'm such a goofball. I am such a goofball. Anyhow, as we go deeper and deeper into this thought, I don't want to give so much here that you guys get lost in this. I really want you guys to be able to grasp what we're saying so that you can, from week to week, you can go deeper in this understanding of functionality. It is so beautiful when you realize that God created her to function and to purposely function for me and me for her because we're not functional without each other. I mean, that's a beautiful thing when you think about it. And I'm not just talking specifically me and Linda, I'm just talking about male and female. That God looked at Adam and said, this isn't good. And what he's basically saying is not because he's a man. Okay, ladies, it's not because he's a man that is not good. He's saying he doesn't have a full purpose here. The whole picture isn't here yet. He needs the whole picture. So he creates the helpmate to come in. And even that helpmate is kind of an idea that we have a Western thought. That's really not what the Hebrew says. But this idea of being able to bring these two together gives them a full purpose and a full functionality within the creative world that God created. So it's this beautiful picture that God has of family and how the roles that we have in this family as we break down Genesis chapter 1 again. So don't get overwhelmed tonight. Don't give up. Okay. If this seems hard for you, it's hard to understand. Don't give up. Hang in there. Okay. And what you brought tonight, Kathy, was excellent. I loved it. She's excited about the stuff. And I want to read that paper. Send me that paper. I want to read that argument. I want to read that argument. Because I mean, you really bring it in a great place because the way she argues about the Toledot, the generations, you can't dismiss an active creative purpose and an active created lineage to Yeshua and get rid of Adam. You can't just say it's evolutionary because it would not lead to the generation of or the birth of Yeshua because he's connected to Adam. So it's to me, the scriptures are literal, but we have to understand what he's trying to get across here. So we looked at it. Again, we're going to be spending a lot of time in Genesis 1, but hopefully when we get done with that, when you read the Bible now, even in the Old Testament, when you read just even in English, you just read any translation, you'll be asking yourself, wow, how did the ancients hear this? How do I actually get into this culture, to be a part of this culture? How do I dream like this so that I can understand these words and understand what God is saying? Amen. Any questions, guys, before we close? I know there was a lot of stuff we gave you tonight, and I love what, back and watch this video. I'll try to post it tomorrow, and maybe even tonight when it's done. I'll try to post it tonight. It'll be late, but it'll be up tomorrow. And really listen to what Kathy, she did a great job of talking about this with the Vav and all that. And I can help you in the Hebrew if you want. I can show it to you in the Hebrew, and we can show you other passages in the Hebrew where the Vav was taken out and it was deduced writing. So it's really, this is or defective writing. You did an excellent job on that, Kathy. You covered it really, really well. I mean, just really, really great. So any questions? Yeah, Lynn.
Yes, so you mentioned about how on day one that God didn't say when he created light that it was good. So it certainly has a function.
No,
to
he
it.
said it was good on day one, or not on day one. When he said, let there be light, he said it was good. But at that point, light didn't function or didn't have a function in a way because light wasn't useful to humankind. So you got to think in human terms. So like, look at it again, but finish your thought there. I'm sorry if I interrupted. I do that a lot. She makes me do that. No, is all that me blaming her? Look at her. She's looking at me like, I'm going to get you, buddy. Okay, go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. Okay, when you look at verse 1, chapter 3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good.
There
So
it is, okay.
if we're thinking about functionality, there's a function to it. However, he doesn't really say any more about that light of being good until he gets to the point where where you can, like, you look at verse 8. It doesn't say it on verse 8 when he actually did the second day, when he made the separation, and then you get to the waters on verse day 3. He doesn't say it was good, or I mean, he actually gets a when he says, when he called the dry land earth, and the waters, and he gathered them together in the seas, he said it was good. Then he gets back to the earth, and he goes all the way through. Then he takes the light that he created that he said was good. Then he says in verse 14, he says God took the lights, he separated them, light from day and all that kind of stuff, and he made the two great lights to rule the day and rule the night, and then set them into the expanse, and then to separate the light from the darkness. You get to verse 18, and God saw that it was functional again. So he took this light, said it was good, it's functional, but doesn't really bring it in until day 4. And then when he puts it all together and he separates it and does more of a creative act to it, he says now it's more functional. It's actually functional. And the only reason why it's functional because it serves mankind. The moon and the sun serve us, which is really great. Kathy, you're going to say something?
Well,
I hope I
just
answered
had a
the question.
question. I had a question related to what Linda's asking about, and he actually covers. He starts to touch on it. I can't remember his chapter 3 or what, on what she's talking about. But you had mentioned on the first night that we might perhaps visit ancient Near Eastern literature, Babylonian, Mesopotamia, and stuff like that, which actually addresses what she's talking about and why it might be structurally the same here as it is in other ancient Near Eastern literature, the day and
Yeah.
the night, the light
Yeah.
and the dark.
Yeah, like yeah, we'll take a look at those. That actually looks good. And if you have it pulled up, you can read from it if you like. But one of the reasons why they know how the ancients believed and how they thought and their thinking isn't just because of the Bible and the Hebrew that they read, but it's because of a lot of the literature of the ancient Near Eastern world that is very similar. It doesn't mean we agree with them and their theology, but you get the mindset of what they believed. And they actually show that they've turned the sun into God, and they turned the moon into a God, but it talks about their function and their role, which is interesting. So
Right.
and it compares it to man's purpose, or why it has a purpose for mankind. So these ancient literature actually has the same kind of idea thinking behind their
Yeah.
head.
The
But it
function.
is its function. Yeah, and so if we could look at the creative world in this idea, it's not a material world, and this is why it's not good to try to prove creation through science, right? It's a functionality. It's like a pen is only good until a pen is only good as long as the pen is in the hands of somebody who can write. But you take a pen, you create the pen, it can sit there forever. It's not going to do you any good. It's not going to do anybody any good because it just sits there. But it's when it's picked up and it's brought into functionality, it becomes existent, if that makes sense. So in the same kind of way, the sun, the moon, the stars don't really mean much. But when they put them in the whole process of God's creative work and why he designed it and gave purpose behind it, and we have the knowledge of that purpose, and we put God's timetable to that purpose, then we get to worship God on Passover. We get to worship God on first fruits. We get to worship God on Sukkot and all these other Moedim, these feasts and festivals, because they fall into this line that God has designed for us to keep an eye on to learn how to do that. But did we answer your question? Okay. Anybody else have a question? Real quick. I know we're bringing a lot of stuff to you. I got Barbara over there with a big smile on her face. She's probably got 100 questions, but she doesn't want to ask. But it's fine. Anybody have a question? Oh, go ahead, Barbara. You unmuting? Oh, no. Okay. She's good. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, great. So don't get overwhelmed. Come back next week and let's dig deeper and become scholars on Genesis 1. That way, when somebody says something, you can say, aha, like Rabbi Adrian says. The good book says, and you can get into it. And you can, yeah. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful evening. Love you guys. And if you get a chance to get the book, get the book. It's a wonderful read. Again, I'm going through it again with the read, and I don't agree with everything that everybody says, but some scholars, like this guy in his book, he says more stuff in one paragraph than most people say in an entire book. I mean, it's just he's really covered his stuff really well. And like Kathy, she's read it or parts of it now, and she's even made an argument because he refers to somebody who wrote something that she argued against in college or made an argument against, and it's great. I mean, scholars will quote from each other and not think much about it, but we sometimes can see those things and say, well, I don't agree with this guy's theology, but boy, what they said here, I can understand. Okay, so how do I look into this a little deeper? So we don't have to agree with somebody completely to understand where they're coming from, but if we get the gist of what they're saying, and I think that this guy is right. I think Walton is right when it comes down to the fact that creation was designed with functionality behind it, not materialistic idea behind it. Okay, so that's the kind of the idea that we walk away with tonight. God bless you guys. Love you. Talk to you later.
Yes. Laila Tov.
Lila Tov, everybody. Have a nice